The sun was low over the dusty plains, painting the sky in gold and orange. The land stretched as far as the eye could see, quiet and empty. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear from the world, and that was exactly what Luke had done. For years he lived alone on his ranch, far from town, far from people, far from the noise of life. The fences around his land were old but strong, just like him. His house stood alone beside the stables, surrounded by wind and silence. Every day looked the same. Every sunrise and sunset passed without change. Luke had once been a man who loved life. He had a wife and a little daughter. They laughed together, cooked together, rode horses across the green hills when the world was still kind. But those days had been washed away by time and sadness. A long illness had taken both of them years ago, leaving Luke with nothing but memories. Since then, he stopped talking much. He stopped smiling. People in town whispered that the rancher had gone cold inside. But he wasn't cold, he was just tired. Too tired to start again. Each morning he woke before dawn, pulled on his worn coat and walked out to feed the horses. His hands were rough from years of work, his back bent from lifting, and his eyes always carried the weight of yesterday. The animals knew his voice, the only sound they ever heard besides the wind. When he spoke to them, it was soft and low, like he was talking to ghosts. He fixed fences, cleaned stalls, rode his horse along the far hills to check the cattle. Then he came back home, ate his supper alone, and listened to the empty creak of the wooden floor. Sometimes he thought about going into town. But every time he got close to saddling his horse, he stopped. There was nothing there for him anymore. The people were strangers now. Life had moved on without him, so he stayed, letting the days blend into one another, his heart buried deep under years of quiet. One cold afternoon, when the sky was gray and the wind cut sharp across the fields, Luke was repairing a broken gate near the barn. His breath came out in white clouds as he hammered the last nail. He wiped his hands and turned toward the house, but then he saw movement near the fence line. It was faint at first, like a shadow through the drifting snow. He squinted and soon he saw figures, and two of them. A woman and a small boy walking slowly, their steps uneven, their clothes dusted with frost. Luke frowned. It was rare for anyone to come this far. He waited, his hand resting on the wooden post, watching as they came closer. The woman's dark hair was tied in a long braid, her shawl torn at the edges. She looked tired but strong. The boy, maybe 6 years old, held her hand tightly. They stopped near the corral. The child's cheeks were red from the cold. Luke walked toward them, cautious. "You lost?" he asked in his deep, unused voice. The woman shook her head. Her voice was quiet but steady. "No, I came to find you," Luke blinked. "Me?" she nodded. "People in town said you were a fair man. They said you help when you can." Luke let out a breath and rubbed his neck. "Town says a lot of things," he muttered. "You should have stayed there. It's a long way out here." She looked down at her son. "They couldn't help us." "They said maybe you would." Luke hesitated. He wasn't used to people asking for anything. "What's your name?" "Lena," she said softly. "This is my son, Toma." Luke looked at the boy whose big brown eyes met his with quiet curiosity. "How far have you walked?" 4 days, Lena answered. "We rested where we could. He's been sick from the cold. We were told your ranch was safe." The rancher sighed and glanced toward the barn. "Come inside. At least get warm." Lena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She led the boy inside the barn where it smelled of hay and horses. Luke lit a lantern, the golden glow spilling across the walls. He handed her a blanket and an old tin cup of warm water. The boy drank eagerly. Luke watched them for a long moment before speaking again. "You running from something?" She shook her head. "No, we're just trying to find a place to live. A place where my son can grow, somewhere honest." The simple words hit Luke harder than he expected. He nodded slowly and left the barn for a moment. When he returned, he carried a pot of stew still warm from his stove. "It's not much," he said, setting it down on a crate. "But it'll help." Lena smiled faintly. "Thank you." She gave the first spoonful to Toma before taking any herself. Watching her do that made Luke remember his own wife feeding their little girl years ago. He turned away, pretending to check the lantern wick, hiding the ache that rose in his chest. After a while, the boy's eyelids drooped, and he fell asleep against his mother's arm. Lena looked up at Luke. "You live alone?" He nodded. For a long time now, she didn't ask why. She didn't need to. His face said enough. Silence filled the barn again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For once, it felt like the quiet had meaning, like it was shared. Finally, Lena spoke again, her voice low. "I know this is too much to ask, but I need your help." Luke frowned slightly. "Help with what?" She looked down, her fingers brushing her son's hair. "My boy needs a father. He needs someone who can show him how to live here, how to work, how to stand on his own feet. I can teach him love, kindness, and prayer, but not the ways of this land. I don't have anyone else." Luke's heart went still. No one had spoken to him like that in years. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. The weight of her request was more than simple pity. It was trust, the kind he thought he'd never deserve again. "Why me?" he finally asked. Lena's eyes met his. They were tired but steady. "Because you're still good," she said softly. "People in town said you don't speak much, but they said your heart is honest. I saw it the moment you gave my boy food before asking who we were." Luke turned away. He didn't know how to respond. For years he had lived behind his silence, believing it protected him. But now, standing before this woman and her son, the walls he built didn't feel so strong anymore. He cleared his throat. "It's getting late. You both can stay the night in the house. There's a fire in a spare room." Lena hesitated. "We don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble," he said quietly. "No one should sleep cold." That night, for the first time in many winters, the little ranch house was alive again. Lena sat near the fire, warming her hands while Toma lay under a thick quilt on the couch. Luke sat across the room, pretending to polish his tools, though his eyes kept drifting to the small boy sleeping peacefully. The warmth of another presence filled the air, soft, steady, real. Lena spoke in a low voice. "You must have loved your family very much." Luke froze. "How did you know I had one?" "The way you look at my boy," she said gently. "A man who never had a child doesn't look like that." He said nothing. After a moment, he whispered, "They're gone now." "I'm sorry," she said simply. Luke nodded. The crackle of the fire filled the silence between them. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe the land brought us here for a reason," she said. Luke didn't answer, but something inside him softened. He looked toward the window where snowflakes drifted past the glass. For years, he had thought the world had forgotten him. Yet here was proof it hadn't. When he finally went to his room, he couldn't sleep. The sound of their breathing in the next room was strange but comforting. The emptiness that once filled his home was replaced by something new, a quiet sense of belonging. As the first light of morning crept through the window, Luke stepped outside and looked over his ranch. The world was the same, and the fields, the fences, the wind. But deep inside, something had changed. He didn't know it yet, but this meeting would heal more than he ever thought possible. Morning light poured softly through the small window of the ranch house, falling across the old wooden floor. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. Luke stirred from his sleep, confused for a moment. He hadn't smelled home-cooked food in years. For so long, his mornings had begun with silence, dust, and coffee gone cold before he finished it. But today felt different. He sat up slowly, listening to the faint sounds coming from the kitchen. A quiet hum, a soft clatter of dishes, a small voice laughing. It didn't feel real. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. But when he stepped out of his room, he saw Lena standing near the fire, her hair loose, her sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot on the stove. The boy, Toma, sat on the floor beside her, playing with a small wooden horse Luke had carved long ago. "Good morning," she said without turning. Her voice was gentle but steady. Luke cleared his throat. "Morning," he said softly. "You slept well?" He nodded slowly. "Better than I have in a long time." Lena smiled faintly and handed him a cup of warm coffee. "I found the beans in the cupboard. I hope you don't mind." He shook his head. "No, it's fine. Just surprised someone remembered how to make it right." They shared a quiet laugh. It was strange for Luke to hear laughter inside his house again. The sound filled the empty spaces, softening the hard corners of his heart. He sat down at the small wooden table while she placed a loaf of bread and some eggs on a plate. Toma looked up at him. "You live here alone?" Luke nodded. "Yes, I do. Been that way for a long time." "Why?" the boy asked innocently. Lena gently hushed him, but Luke smiled faintly. "Because life sometimes changes before you're ready," he said. The boy thought for a moment and then nodded. not really understanding but sensing the weight behind the words. After breakfast, Luke went outside to begin his chores. He expected Lena and Toma to stay inside where it was warm, but when he stepped out, he found them already there. Lena was carrying a basket of laundry and Toma followed close behind, eager to help. "You don't have to do that," Luke said. "I can't sit and do nothing," she replied. "If we stay here, we work." Luke couldn't argue. He watched her hang the wet clothes on the line, her hands moving quickly, her face calm. The boy chased the chickens, laughing when they flapped away. The sound of his laughter echoed through the valley, bouncing off the barn walls like sunlight. Luke hadn't realized how empty the ranch had sounded until now. By midday, clouds had gathered and the wind began to rise. Luke worked on the fence while Lena brought him a cup of water. She stood watching him for a while, her eyes tracing the endless stretch of land. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. "Lonely, but beautiful." He wiped his brow and looked out too. "It was all I had left," he said. "So I stayed." She nodded, understanding more than he said. When they returned to the house, Toma was sitting on the porch steps, holding a small feather he had found. "Look," he said proudly. "A hawk's feather." Luke took it and smiled. "You've got a good eye, kid. That's from a red-tailed hawk. They nest up by the ridge. Can we see them?" Toma asked excitedly. Luke hesitated. "It's a rough trail. You'll have to be careful." Lena smiled softly. "He'll be careful. And I think he needs to see something beautiful." Luke looked at them both and then nodded. "All right. Tomorrow morning." That night, the three of them sat by the fire again. The air outside had turned cold, but inside, the warmth spread through the room. Toma fell asleep early, his head resting on his mother's lap. Lena looked across the flames at Luke. "You've been kind to us." "More than you should have," Luke shook his head. "It's not kindness. Just what's right." She studied him quietly. "Most people wouldn't agree. Most people see us and turn away." He looked into the fire. "People forget what it's like to need someone." "I haven't." For a long while, they sat in silence. The fire crackled and the wind whistled softly outside. Luke's eyes drifted toward the boy, sleeping peacefully. Something about the sight made his chest tighten. He remembered the nights when his daughter used to fall asleep beside the fire the same way. "Your boy's got spirit," he said. "He does," Lena said proudly. "He's all I have. Everything I do is for him." Luke nodded slowly. "He's lucky to have you." Lena smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. "No," she said softly. "We're lucky to have found you." The next morning, true to his word, Luke saddled his horse early and packed a small bag of food. He helped Toma climb up behind him while Lena walked beside them. The trail up the ridge was steep and narrow, but the view was worth it. From the top, they could see miles of open land, golden under the rising sun. Toma gasped in wonder. "It's so big." Luke smiled. "That's freedom. You can't see the end of it." Lena stood quietly, her hair blowing in the wind. "He's never seen anything like this," she said. Luke watched the boy's face glow with excitement. For the first time in years, Luke felt pride again, not for the land or the work, but for sharing something with another soul. When they returned home, Luke noticed something odd. The fence near the creek had fallen overnight. He started to fix it, but Toma ran over to help. "I can hold the post," the boy said. Luke smiled. "All right. Hold it steady." Together they worked until the fence stood straight again. Lena watched from a distance, her eyes full of quiet joy. It was the first time she had seen her son laugh so freely with another man. As the days passed, the ranch changed. It was no longer silent. Lena cooked meals that filled the air with warmth. Toma followed Luke everywhere, eager to learn how to tie a rope, how to care for horses, how to read the sky before rain. Luke taught him everything patiently, his voice growing gentler each day. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke sat on the porch, sharpening his tools. Lena joined him, sitting quietly beside him. "You've done more for us than I could ever repay," she said softly. He shook his head. "You've done more for me than you know." "How so?" she asked. Luke looked out at the horizon. "Before you came, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. I didn't think I had any purpose left. But now," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "now I remember what it's like to care again." Lena's eyes softened. "Then maybe we were meant to find each other." He turned to her, meeting her gaze. "Maybe we were." A quiet understanding passed between them. Not of romance, but of shared pain and hope. That night a storm rolled in. Rain pounded the roof, wind rattled the windows, and thunder echoed over the plains. Luke went out to check the barn, making sure the animals were safe. When he came back drenched, Lena was waiting by the door with a blanket. "You didn't have to do that," she said, wrapping it around his shoulders. "Old habits," he said with a small smile. "Can't rest if I don't check," she laughed softly. "You care too much." He looked at her, his voice quiet but sincere. "Not enough for too long." The storm passed by morning, leaving the air fresh and cool. The sun broke through the clouds and everything sparkled with new life. Luke watched Toma running through puddles, laughing as Lena called after him. The ranch that once felt like a prison now felt alive. Luke realized something he hadn't dared to admit before. Maybe this woman and her son hadn't just come to him for help. Maybe they had come to save him too.